Welcome to Unauthorized Access, the podcast focused on the who's who in the cybersecurity and incident response world. Today, I'm joined by Gene Fishel. He's a frequent NetD speaker, former regulator, and now member of Troutman's Regulatory Investigations, Strategy, and Enforcement Practice, also known as RISE. Gene, thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Sadia. It's a pleasure to be on, and thank you for having me. I'm a longtime listener and honored to be featured on Unauthorized Access.
Gene, I love it when people say that. I think we're about 8 or 9 episodes in, so this is perfect.
There's been a great 8 and 9 episodes.
Exactly. Gene, I need to tell you something. Last week, I was in the Richmond office, which is where Gene sits, and I spent a lot of time admiring all of the trinkets in your office. Yeah, I did. I read everything. I looked at, I think if you had notes on your desks, I probably read them. But you have one, I love the Richmond office because everyone's office looks like they've lived there for the last 50 years at this point. And it's so well decorated, and it's so different to Orange County, which is where in California, because our office, they're like very clean. And not to say that your office isn't clean, but nobody really decorates their office like the attorneys in the Richmond office, where everyone added their own. You could tell everyone's personality.
Right. Well, we have to make up for things with our office because we don't have the weather you all have in Orange.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And we spend a lot of time in our offices, whereas I'm sure you all are outside having a great time.
Well, you know what? I do think that there's a difference I bet more people work from home in the Orange County office because I think Richmond was a little bit busier. Anyways, I walked out of your office thinking that you are the most interesting man in the world.
No, well, I'm not, but thank you for that.
No, for sure. And even if I wanted to decorate my office, I just decided I wouldn't because I don't have as many ornaments to put up in my office.
I will say this, when you work for the government for 20 years, you collect a lot of trinkets and plaques and coins and that sort of thing. That kind of makes up for other deficiencies in work.
Okay. Yeah, so your coins, that's what I wanted to ask you about. One thing I want you to do is tell the listeners a little bit about your background, because I think it is very unique and it's very helpful when we're going to talk later on about our incident response practice. But I specifically want to know about the coins and what I need to do to get them.
Well, so I spent 20 years in the Virginia Attorney General's office. For 16 of those years, I was chief of the computer crime section. We had a dual role there. I managed attorneys and also a computer forensics unit of computer forensic examiners. And we handled both criminal and civil cases out of that section. We investigated and prosecuted cyber crimes across Virginia in all jurisdictions of Virginia. And on the civil side, we enforced Virginia's privacy statutes. So database breach notification laws and also parts of the Consumer Protection Act. Parallel to that, I was fortunate to partner with the U.S. Attorney's Office also for 20 years, where I was a special assistant U.S. attorney. So I had the fortune of prosecuting hundreds of cyber cases in federal court, also in both districts of Virginia, which leads me to the coins, because for those of you who have been involved in law enforcement, know that anyone involved in law enforcement loves what are called challenge coins. And so when you work, and one of my goals, whenever I worked with a new law enforcement agency, I would ask for a coin if they didn't give me one at the outset, which a lot of times that just happens. The first time you work with an agent, they'll a lot of times hand you their organization's coin. And so most law enforcement agencies, federal and state and local, will usually design some sort of coin that they hand out as kind of tokens of appreciation. And we had our own coins at the Attorney General's office. Each Attorney General that was elected would design his or her own coin. It's a thing, where you exchange these coins working with the different law enforcement agencies. And I one day decided I need to get a nice little stand. They, of course, sell stands just for these challenge coins. And I think last year at some point I said, I need to display these things because it looks impressive, even though I'm
Very impressive.
That's the story of the coins. It's primarily a law enforcement thing. But I've been fortunate enough to work with, a variety of federal, state, and local agencies. I mean, dozens and dozens across the board in dealing with cyber issues.
Gene, I work with law enforcement all the time. Do you think they're going to be inclined to give me a coin if I start asking them?
Yeah, I think if you ask, and knowing you, Sadia, I know they would be happy to give you, in particular, a coin. I think it's more of a kind of a default action between law enforcement, that you hand these things out. But I have no doubt next time you work with the FBI or whatever, FBI, they have a lot of money. So they have all sorts of coins. So if you're working with the FBI, definitely ask those guys for a coin. And they'll give you one. It's not just limited to law enforcement.
Gene, did any law enforcement agent even say decline giving you a coin?
Decline me?
Yes, you.
Not that I remember. Sometimes, you know how law enforcement budgets are. Sometimes they run out of coins. Oh, we just gave out our last coin. And so they might not get them for another year because they've handed them all out. And that kind of thing is tight, as you can imagine, in government. So sometimes I've definitely asked before, they've run out.
Wait, did I hear you correctly? So FBI, law enforcement, but the AG's offices, they have their own coins too?
Yeah. In fact, next time, I think I have some spare ones. Next time I see you, I will be sure to bring along some spare AG coin I have.
Well, Gene, you should know we have a great inter-office system at Troutman, and you can just we don't really have to wait that long.
I actually have not utilized that since I've been here. For those listening, I've been here about 7 months now. I joined the firm in June of last year, but I've not had a chance to utilize the inter-office mail system. Maybe I should put it to the test.
Yeah, just test it out, see if it works. I will confirm on my end as soon as I get the coin.
Okay.
So let's add that to our list. Okay, one thing you said actually was interesting to me was the forensic examiners that sit within the AG's office. Are they forensic examiners like what I think in the traditional, if there's a cybersecurity incident, we bring in a forensic firm to do the forensic investigation. Does the AG's office have their own forensic team essentially? Would they try to mimic investigations just to confirm scope, or can you expand on what is the purpose of that?
They are what you probably think they are. They are computer forensic examiners that in the AG's office, they do mostly criminal work, criminal investigations.
Okay.
So what they are doing is the way it worked here in Virginia is an investigating law enforcement agency, say state police, Virginia State Police, or even some federal agencies would call them up when they are about to execute a search warrant, for example, at a suspect's house. Our forensic team, they actually had an RV that was a forensic lab, a mobile forensic lab. And so what would happen was the agents executing the warrant in the suspect's home, apartment, whatever business would bring out the seized evidence, and the forensic examiners would actually triage the evidence at the scene to determine what was of evidentiary value. And those items, if there's a laptop or a cell phone involved that would potentially have value, the investigating agency would seize that item and then turn it over to our forensic examiners who would conduct a full forensic examination on the device. And so not only did we have a mobile lab in the AG's office, we had an actual forensic lab in our building that was specifically designed to conduct forensic examinations. So they have as you know, it's very capital intensive. They have all the servers, the software, the Faraday devices, all of that stuff to conduct full-blown forensic examinations. And so they would conduct the examination, produce a report, and then if it went to trial, they would testify as experts in the trial. They also did some civil work for state agencies and that sort of thing. And they would also go on scene if called for, if there were large servers involved in businesses, which we see a lot in the data breach. They would isolate segments and copy segments of the server and do a forensic examination sort of off the original server. It's a little trickier, of course, when you're dealing with businesses with massive servers, because you can't just pull up the server and take it back to the forensic lab. You got to image it at the business and then work off the copy. And of course, in forensic examinations, examiners always work off the copy. They never, or they shouldn't. They shouldn't work off the original because you potentially could change the evidence or change what happened. So our forensic examiners did all of that. They were very good. Not every attorney general has a lab like that. It just varies by state. But fortunately, we had the funding to set something up like that to help law enforcement and businesses who were victimized by cyber crimes. Sometimes it wasn't always a suspect, but sometimes our forensic examiners would assist victims in figuring out what happened, say, on their server. With our clients, when they suffer a breach and you call in a firm, you're trying to figure out really what happened. You're trying to get to the truth and see where the access points were and what data was potentially compromised, that sort of thing.
Okay. And so this is so interesting to me. And I swear you coming on board to Troutman was one of the best things to happen to me, because every time, I'm dealing with an incident and dealing with the regulators, now I feel like I can pick your brain as to what are the regulators really thinking, especially, if I write something in a certain way or present a certain set of facts, I have you in my pocket now to run things by. And I wanted to ask, when you used to receive reports of incidents, and I'm talking specifically on behalf of businesses, what types of incidents, like initial reports you get, what type of incidents actually got your attention that you felt like you wanted to follow up on?
Sure. So in enforcing our privacy laws, when I was a regulator, we would get, and it would almost always revolve around a data incident, most likely a data breach, actually. Organizations and businesses, as the case in most states, not every state, but in Virginia, if an organization, of course, has suffered a data breach, they have to report it to the Attorney General's office in Virginia. And so we would get, as you can imagine, hundreds of such notifications a year, where my attorneys and I would be responsible for sifting through these notifications to determine if an organization is complying with the notification statute. As you can also imagine, there are hundreds of these notifications where we look at them once and that's it. Most companies, organizations now, especially today, are hiring skilled counsel such as yourselves. And data breach incident response has now been perfected over the course of many years now, where the notifications have just steadily improved over time. I've seen that because I was there at the outset when our law was passed. But there are certain unavoidable facts that will definitely raise our attention. The two most prominent that would catch my eye are the sensitivity of the information involved in the incident. So something like social security numbers or health data, health diagnoses information might garner more scrutiny than, say, credit card numbers, for example. There's just two different kinds of data we're talking about, and the risk to consumers that are affected it's greater, the risk of identity theft. And the other thing was the size and scope of the breach. And that really just comes down to the potential number of consumers affected. So in Virginia, organizations have to notify if just one consumer was potentially affected. And again, that it's different among states. Some states have a threshold where they have to notify the Attorney General, but in Virginia, it just takes one. So we would get notifications from one or a handful of potentially affected consumers to millions. And of course, the breaches that involve millions of Virginians, that is absolutely going to make me take at least a second look. And I say this, having worked with attorneys general all around the country, I've worked with all of them. When there's a national breach that is affecting most states, the breaches you hear about in the news, the attorneys general get together and they have regular meetings where they discuss these incidents. And it's not always the case that a major breach is going to garner or kick off some sort of investigation. But the larger the breach is, the more likely that is to happen. But again, that being said, it very well could be that a company, an organization, even if it's a large breach with sensitive information, has done everything right. They've filed timely notice, they're sent out timely notice, they had proper security to begin with, which is something else that now states are even more so starting to look at with the passage of these comprehensive data privacy acts. Or it could be that a company didn't take the correct steps. And a lot of times we determine, or I keep saying we, but the regulators, or not a regulator anymore, but they would ask some initial inquiry, send out some inquiries with some general questions, trying to get some more information. And if they're answered satisfactory, that might be it. The investigation's over. If not, if there's something peculiar about the processes, say the organization employed prior to the breach or something like that, then it might lead to a full-blown investigation. And that investigation can involve every state. It could have 50 states and territories, 50 plus states, or it could involve a few states, maybe just, of course, a state's going to be interested if their citizens have been affected, but not every breach affects every state. A company that is headquartered in a particular state, that state might take an interest because of that. And so there could be a variety of different kind of makeups of investigating bodies, just depending on the incident. It could be dozens. It just all depends on the facts.
I told you that I didn't give you any questions beforehand, and it was going to be a very impromptu interview.
Yeah.
I always know we're already at the top of our time, but I'm going to, despite what everyone tells me, I'm going to keep pushing us forward because there's 2 questions that I have for you. Maybe there's going to be a part 2 to this because I think it's an important topic and something that I'm interested in sitting from given my practice. But my first question is there something when, an attorney is submitting the notification or a business is submitting their notice to the AG, is there something that a business could say or an action that they could take as part of their response efforts that would make you want to be more inclined to think, okay, there's not much more to do here? Or is that just not a thing? It just depends really on the facts of the incident itself, and maybe these remedial actions taken don't necessarily weigh on whether or not you're going to get a response back.
Of course, it's fact dependent. It's always going to be fact dependent. However, and this is what I've told companies when I was giving talks as a regulator, the thing that will impress me or lower the temperature if it's a sensitive breach is when an organization gives notice early. That will include, just in short, the earlier the notice to the AG's office, the better. That's really what companies should take away from this. But I certainly received notifications where maybe the company was not ready or was in the process of assembling the notice that it was going to send out to the affected consumers, but they just gave us a heads up that, hey, we suffered this breach. I don't have the formal notice ready to send to you or the consumer, but that's in the works. Just letting you know. I think a lot of regulators are suspicious of obstruction and stonewalling when it comes to incidents. And I think the earlier that happens, you're essentially building up goodwill with the regulator. I've just seen it so many different ways that if they're giving off the impression that they're stonewalling or obstructing, it's not going to end well. It's going to cost them more time and money. It's going to raise the ire of the regulators and kind of force them to take a closer look and maybe even send a legal process, subpoenas, orders, whatever it is. And so I always appreciated that advance notice to the point, and now being on the other side, of course, and I knew this also at the time, there are many considerations to take in when notifying a regulator, and one being if you even have to, but a lot of other things to shore up privilege and a lot of consideration. So assuming you can, assuming it's prudent, I just recommend notice as early as possible. One thing I'll say just to finish up this point, and one thing I appreciate now representing clients and being on this side is When I was a regulator, I really had a singular focus, and that focus was to get the best results for citizens of Virginia, to ensure that there was restitution, if that was need be, and ensure that organizations were following the law. On this side, representing clients, it's much more complex. There's just so many more things to consider. There are business interests to consider. There are privilege issues to consider, of course. When we're representing in a regulatory investigation, there's potential multi-district litigation or class actions that could spawn from the incident. There's even consideration of potential co-defendants in an action. So it's a much more complex and challenging practice on this side, which I've liked. And one thing I've liked with Troutman in particular, and I knew Troutman's reputation. That's why I came over here. I knew of it. It enjoys such a great reputation. It's just the high level of talent with attorneys and staff and the diverse skill set. And also, and I talked with a lot of partners at the firm. I just love the team approach we take here at Troutman and working, collaborating with you, Sadia. And when I say high level talent, I'm referring to you and your team.
That's what I wanted to confirm. I wanted to confirm that I impressed.
The cross collaboration and the 360 approach we're taking with you and your incident response and your incident response team and our investigations team, I think is serving our clients well. And it's just such a unique approach to tackling what is a very complex or can be a very complex situation.
So, Gene, to summarize what you just said, it sounds like you think I earned that medal that you're going to send me after this recording.
Yeah,
okay, good. Okay, Gene, I'm really glad that you ended with that because that was my question. It was going to be, now that you're on the other side, is there anything you learned from your time at Troutman that, you would have considered, or you wish you would have considered more at your time at the AG's office? And it sounds like you've always known that it's a complex issue and maybe you get more visibility into all the complexities that, businesses actually deal with.
Yes, absolutely.
I will say your point about notifying early. When doing incident response, I'm always thinking about, at the end of the day, what's the story that I have to tell regulators about the incident? What's the story I'm going to tell consumers? Or what's the story that the media is going to pick up on? And I always think it depends, right? But usually it's a better story when you can say, look, as soon as we figured, what was going on, we told you what happened. We told you even before we figured it out, just so it was on your radar. So that early notification, I do think is very helpful. Gene, I know I said this is a very important question, mainly for my own personal purposes, because I travel around. I'm always interested in knowing favorite restaurant, your favorite restaurant in Richmond. Steven, also a member of RISE, practice leader of RISE, gave me his recommendation while I was out there, but I'm going to be back out there in March. And so what do I need to try?
Oh, man, that's a tough question. Richmond actually has, I think, a very underrated restaurant scene here. We have some great restaurants. Gosh, I would say one of my favorites, but it's tough to get a reservation, is La Possum.
Okay, that's exactly what Steven said.
Is it really?
Yeah, it is exactly what he said. And so right now I'm making a reservation for March.
Yes, you absolutely have to go to La Possum. It's in a very cool space. It's tough. Like I said, it's tough to get a reservation.
Okay, so here's what I'm doing. I'm making a reservation for you, me, and Steven. But Gene, thank you so much for joining me. I always learn so much talking to you. It always makes me think about the incidents I have right now and how I could change my approach or what more I could do to kind of minimize hopefully any further inquiries from regulators. So again, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Thanks to the audience for tuning in. We'll be back again next month with another episode of Unauthorized Access. Thanks so much.
Copyright Troutman Pepper Hamilton Sanders, LLP. These recorded materials are designed for educational purposes only. This podcast is not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual participants. Troutman Pepper does not make any representations or warranties, express or implied, regarding the contents of this podcast. Information on previous case results does not guarantee a similar future result. Users of this podcast may save and use the podcast only for personal or other non-commercial educational purposes. No other use, including, without limitation, reproduction, retransmission, or editing of this podcast may be made without the prior written permission of Troutman Pepper. If you have any questions, please contact us at troutman.com.